think you all are ready for this, right? Okay. Welcome, everyone, tonight to this lecture. We're very excited to have everyone here. It's a great turnout, despite the weather, the threats of the weather anyway. So, and we have a really exciting panel, so I'm going to be fairly short and to the point. I'm Brian Turner. I'm president and CEO of the Preservation Society of Charleston. And it's great to have such a great turnout, especially because this church is such an incredible landmark in our city. So I just want to first say a big thank you to the St. Philip's team for being such a welcoming host. When we first approached them with this talk in mind, we hoped we could talk about the history and maybe have a member or two from the project team to share their expertise. But of course, they went above and beyond, and I think that shows the true enthusiasm for this project. Thank you to their exceptional team. We'll hear the full 360-degree perspective tonight from the church leaders, the structural engineer, and contracting team, not to mention a presentation and recording for anyone unable to make it in person tonight. I'd like to recognize the St. Philip's congregants who have joined us tonight. If you're a member of the church, would you please raise your hand? Awesome. So it's great to see so many of you interested in the preservation of one of Charleston's most historic and iconic landmarks. In a moment, you'll hear from Foster about the history of the church, but if you'll permit me a moment, I want to share with you a bit about the Preservation Society's own history. We were founded in 1920 by citizens concerned with the development and the responsible preservation of Charleston. You may have heard of Susan Pringle Frost, who led the charge to ensure that properties like the Joseph Manigault House were saved from demolition, and in doing so created the first grassroots preservation organization in the nation. Today, we're a proud membership organization with over 4,000 members spanning the globe, all who share a love for this historic city. Please consider becoming a member if you're not already. We offer 3 member meetings a year held at unique sites like the Dock Street Theater and the Navy base up in North Charleston. You'll also receive regular advocacy updates, which of course is the focus of our work, on pressing preservation issues. Recently, we've been highlighting Charleston landmarks facing uncertain futures and the concerning trends of unauthorized demolition and the irrevocable loss of historic places in the city. So thank you again for coming out tonight. We hope this will be the first of several lectures in a historic sacred space. So be on the lookout for more event announcements in the future. And now I'd like to pass the mic to Reverend Jeff Miller, the rector of St. Philip's.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone tonight. It's my great honor to welcome you to St. Philip's and to this lecture. We're delighted to have you with us. I'm going to be very brief tonight. I know some of you have a hard time believing that. Those of you are members, but nevertheless, I'm going to be. But before I begin and say what I'm going to say, I just want to introduce you to the panel up here and to the individuals who are to my left. To my immediate left is Foster Gilliard. Foster is a retired lawyer. Those of you around St. Philip's know him very well. He's a native Charlestonian. His family has gone here for generations, and Foster was raised in this parish. He is the former chancellor, that is the lawyer for the parish, and he is the former senior warden of the parish, so one of the leaders in the laity. So we're delighted to have Foster with us, and he's going to be giving you a brief history of the parish when I finish. Next to him is Jim Stelling. He is the construction chair. He really is the man who makes it work around here with all of the construction that you see. He's really the one that keeps it all straight, and we're so grateful for his work and for his expertise. Next to him is Eddie Porcher. He's our chief engineer. Today is my 30th wedding anniversary, and Eddie Porcher is responsible for bringing me together with my wife. So if I slip out of here, that's because as long as I make a 7 o'clock dinner at Sorelli, I'm not in the doghouse. But so I'm grateful for Eddie Porcher. Next to him is Nathan Youngman. He's our project superintendent, and he's part of our, he's not a member, but we nevertheless consider him a part of our family because we see him more than we see almost anybody else. And next to him is Ryan McGee, who is our chief contractor. So give these men a round of applause. So I've been asked to welcome you and just say a brief word of introduction, basically how we got all of this started. And I could tell you pretty simply and pretty quickly. When I was in seminary over 30 years ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury at that time was Dr. George Carey, and he came to address the student body. And he was asked a question by one of my classmates, if you had one bit of advice to give to young students who are being prepared for ordination or going out and serve in the church, what would it be? And he had a couple of things to say, but one thing that he said was this. He said, just remember, wherever you go as Christian ministers, there are already Christians there. He said, your job is to make sure that there are Christians when you leave. And I took that to mean that part of my job as a minister of the gospel is to leave a place better when I leave than when I found it. And so that's really what I'm endeavoring to do here at St. Philip's. I recognize that the primary responsibility to leave the place better meant to leave it better than I found it spiritually. I have a wonderful foundation that has been laid by gospel ministers who have gone before me, but it is my responsibility to build on that solid foundation. And so my sincere hope is that when I leave St. Philip's, whenever the Lord deems that is to be, that I will have left the place better off spiritually. But I also wanted to leave the place better off physically as well. And when I first came here to St. Philip's, it really took my breath away. And if you've been in historic St. Philip's Church, you can understand why. I've been in some magnificent churches. I served for 17 years in Beaufort. I was the rector at St. Helena's Church down there, a very historic church. But even after being in St. Philip's for 5, 6, 7 years, every time I walked into that building, it literally took my breath away. It was a magnificent building. But I recognize that these buildings are also responsibilities. It is, as you've already heard, one of the most iconic buildings in the city, one of the most iconic buildings really in the South. We were voted one of the 10 most beautiful churches by TripAdvisor in the country. And so we realize that we have a certain responsibility to take care of these buildings and to maintain them for future generations. And I wanted to be certain that we would pass on to the next generation a blessing rather than a burden. And so soon after I arrived here, I went to Mr. Jim Stelling, who was at the time a member of the vestry, and then he went on to become the treasurer. Jim has a background in construction. He was in charge of Ruscon Construction Company when we did the work on the church following Hurricane Hugo. And so I went to him, and I recognized that in a building like this and in a campus as large as ours, we're almost a full city block, there's a lot that has to be maintained and cared for. And I went to Jim and I said, Jim, could you please do me a favor? I said, I want to put together a long-range planning committee. And I said, I want us to do a physical audit of the entire historic block, of every building that we own, every building that we are responsible for. And I want you to tell me, what do we need to do to bring those buildings up to the point where we have a generational fix? Not just a temporary fix, not just a Band-Aid patch, but something that would be a generational fix, so that when we pass these buildings on to future generations, they see them as the great blessing that they really are. And so that's what Jim did. He undertook to put together a great long-range planning committee. And we were hoping to begin work, but a number of things interfered with that, not the least of which was a worldwide pandemic, which sort of halted our work. But as soon as we were able, we got to work on all of this, and that's what you see taking place around you. Every single building on our historic campus, and we own several buildings here, every single one of those buildings is going to be touched. The church was the top priority, and we're going to spend most of our time and energy on the church, but this building is also going to be expanded, and it's going to be restored, and we have restored the building behind Philadelphia Alley. We're in the process, actually, of restoring that. Our chapel, which was built in the 1850s, is going to be touched. Our office building, which is 142 Church Street, is also going to be touched. We have an historic building behind that called the St. Philip's Tea Garden. You may not have seen it. You may have walked by without even seeing it, but it's also a meeting space on campus. All of these buildings are going to be touched. And when they are finished, it is going to be a full restoration. And our goal is that we will set a standard for restoration that this city can be proud of. So that's how all of this got started, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Foster Gilliard, and he'll give you a brief history, 300 and some years in 3 minutes. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me just get these slides going. Thank you, Jeff. First of all, I want to just extend my welcome to all of you as well. It's great to have all of you here at St. Philip's. I know we have a lot of St. Philippians here in the audience, and when I talk about the history of the church, you all know that, the St. Philippians do, but we thought we would begin with a very brief history of the church just to give you some historical context to what we will be talking about later in the program. St. Philip's was founded in 1680. It is the oldest congregation in South Carolina, in fact, the oldest south of Virginia. The first St. Philip's was constructed in 1681 and 1682 at the corner of Meeting and Broad Streets, the site that is presently occupied by St. Michael's Church. But by the first decade of the 1700s, the original church, which was built of cypress, began to decay, show signs of decay. It was also too small for the growing population of the city and the growing congregation of St. Philip's. So in 1711, planning began for a new and bigger church on this site, the site that the present-day church is situate. So planning began in 1711, construction on the new church began in 1712, and the first service in the second St. Philip's Church was held on Easter Sunday, 1723, although the church was not entirely completed until 1733. This is a sketch, of the second St. Philip's Church. It was built in the Anglo-Palladian style with massive Tuscan porticos, as you can see, and giant Doric columns. It was later described in the Charleston Mercury newspaper as being unsurpassed in architectural beauty by any edifice in the Union. In 1751, after the construction of the second St. Philip's Church, as a result of the increasing population in the city, St. Philip's Parish was split into two parishes, St. Philip's and St. Michael's, and construction began shortly thereafter, around 1752, on a second Anglican church in the city, St. Michael's Church, and it was built on the original site of St. Philip's at the corner of Meeting and Broad Streets. St. Michael's later opened for worship in 1761. Then on February 14th, 1835, tragedy struck St. Philip's, and the second St. Philip's Church, which I showed you the sketch of, burned to the ground. It was a tragic fire, but after the fire, planning began immediately on the third St. Philip's Church, and for that purpose, the vestry hired a local architect. His name was Joseph Hyde. He was hired to design the church, and on November 12th, 1835, the cornerstone of the third St. Philip's Church, the church that you see here today, was laid on the foundation of the church that burned. The new church was completed in 1838, although the iconic steeple that everyone loves so much, it was designed by another architect, another Charleston architect, Edward B. White, and it was completed in 1850. Following completion of the church, St. Philip's suffered a series of man-made and natural disasters, beginning with the bombardment of the church during the Civil War and the earthquake of 1886, both of which did considerable damage to the church. Then in 1920, there was another fire at St. Philip's, a smaller fire in the chancel of the church, following which the chancel was rebuilt and enlarged And to assist the church for that enlargement, the vestry hired an architect from Boston. His name was Ralph Adams Cram. Cram was considered the finest ecclesiastical architect in the nation at the time. He also designed the chapel at West Point and the chapel on the campus of Princeton University, as well as St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue in New York City. In 1938, a severe tornado touched down on the campus of St. Philip's and severely damaged the small chapel on our campus. The chapel is located about 120 feet behind me, behind the church. And of course, in 1989, Hurricane Hugo struck Charleston, and it did significant damage to the church, damage that was repaired in the 1990s. And Jim Stelling worked on that back then. It was repaired in the 1990s at a cost of about $4 million. In 1973, St. Philip's was designated a National Historic Landmark. It is considered, as Jeff mentioned, one of the most beautiful, one of the most historic churches in the United States. This is a photograph of the interior of St. Philip's. It was taken prior to the commencement of the restoration work. As you can see, it is a magnificent church. It'll be even more beautiful, more magnificent when the construction renovations are completed. This photo shows the nave of the church as well as the chancel around the altar that was rebuilt in the 1920s, designed by Ralph Adams Cram. In the St. Philip's churchyard, you will find the graves of Edward Rutledge, who signed the Declaration of Independence, as well as Charles Pinckney, who signed the United States Constitution, as well as the graves of a number of former governors of South Carolina, former senators from the state, and mayors of the city of Charleston. So in its 345-year history, St. Philip's has survived fires, the British occupation during the Revolutionary War, cannon fire during the Civil War, the earthquake of 1886, the tornado of 1938, and multiple hurricanes culminating with Hurricane Hugo in 1989. And through it all, St. Philip's has not only survived, but it has thrived and has played and continues to play a significant role in the religious, cultural, and civic life of this city. So to honor our past and to prepare this campus and this church for the future, we've embarked on a capital campaign to fund the generational restoration of the church and the campus that Jeff talked about. And to tell you more about that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Stelling.
Not to worry, this is not what I'm going to talk from. I want to also welcome everyone to St. Philip's. I had no idea we would have so many parishioners here. It makes my heart twitter. And we want to welcome each of you who are both members here as well. Let me, Jeff mentioned our campus. He calls, and rightly so, he calls these our gospel assets. So this is very familiar to you parishioners, but let me just point them out if I may. The sanctuary obviously there in the center. The graveyard surrounds it. Across the street is what we call our West Cemetery. To the left of the sanctuary is our parish house where we are today. And he mentioned that we're not only renovating it as part of the program, but also have an addition planned. Cumberland and State Street is being renovated as we speak and will actually house a new classical Christian school opening in 2026. The chapel that Foster mentioned was finished in 1850. And then to the right, we have the tea garden, which sits right behind the church office on Queen Street. And oftentimes, if you have smaller groups, we use that building. And then the church office houses our clergy and staff. So let's get started. In 2021, as Jeff mentioned, the vestry approved the formation of a planning committee. Our charge was to identify the future needs and priorities of St. Philip's. The restoration of our historic buildings, especially our beautiful sanctuary, was identified as one of the highest priorities. As mentioned, the last major restoration of St. Philip's Sanctuary was a little over 30 years ago. Foster mentioned Hurricane Hugo. It was deferred maintenance, and Hurricane Hugo kind of finished it off. So we had no choice but an extensive restoration of the exterior with a concentration, again, on the steeple. Repairs and replacement of failing stucco and brick substrate were made where needed, windows were reworked, et cetera, et cetera. The interior was extensively refurbished as well. Plaster was repaired and replaced where necessary, as was the wooden and marble flooring. The entire interior of the church was also painted. The south sacristy was added at the time, matching the north sacristy. Now, 30 years later, we find ourselves in a similar situation. Our beautiful church building is again in need of a major restoration. As you know, time and the elements are unkind to historic structures, as the elements of stucco, brick, mortar, and plaster are subjected to water intrusion and natural deterioration. So in 2022, the construction committee was formed with vestry approval to provide budget estimates for each building, and these estimates, as mentioned by Jeff, would be the foundation for a supporting capital campaign for all restoration activities. So to develop the scopes and supporting estimates for all these buildings, we hired Eddie Porcher, a structural engineer with Stantec Engineers. Ironically, Eddie and I both were involved in the previous restoration efforts mentioned earlier. Eddie designed the scaffolding of the sanctuary in the early 1990s, and also that which surrounds the steeple today. I got a sidebar this. Eddie looks like he's about 35. Well, he was 34 when I went to him to talk about putting the scaffolding up. I thought, oh my God, what have I done here? But anyway, he did a marvelous job. We also engaged Ryan McGee of McGee Ratcliffe Construction as part of our team. Ryan has much experience with restoring historical structures as a contractor, working with his father, Tom McGee, who probably many of you know, in his own right as a partner in his firm. As a result of their efforts, Eddie produced a document entitled St. Philip's Church Schematic Repair Recommendations. This document is 495 pages and consists of photos and text detailing recommendations and repairs for every building we have. Ryan, God bless his soul, then took this document and prepared construction estimates for each of the buildings. With regards to the sanctuary, the charge for the construction committee, as mentioned earlier, was a generational fix, a generational restoration. When asked for more details, we simply said, there will be no stone left unturned. What else can you say? For 6 months, these gentlemen and their teams climbed, crawled, and inspected every nook and cranny possible, from the cross to the crawl space beneath. Subcontractors were brought in to assist with accurate costing of all elements and systems within the church. As the capital campaign began, we decided to phase the restoration. Phase 1 took place in late 22 and 23 and concentrated on the west cemetery, the graveyard fencing, our beautiful entrance gates on the north, south, and west porticos. Interesting, the iron gates on the west portico served as the altar rail in the church that was completed in 1723, which Foster mentioned earlier. After the fire in 1835, they were saved and installed as the gates for the west portico doors of the newly rebuilt sanctuary church in 1838. This is the church in which we worship today. It is believed that these 3 gates are among the oldest locally made ironwork in the city. Much of the ironwork around the city, but they called in folks from England and whatnot. Phase 1 also included all exterior restoration on the nave. Water intrusion areas were corrected. All parapets were rebuilt and any failing stucco and brick substrates were restored. An updated lightning protection system was also installed, as we had experienced some earlier lightning strikes. Phase 2, which is now underway, began in mid-2024. The scope includes the restoration of the spire, regilding of our cross, refurbishment of our clocks, restoration of the interior and exterior of the steeple, porticos, and all the interior of the narthex, nave, apse, and sacristies. New HVAC and lighting systems will be installed as well. So let me stop here, turn the program over to the gentlemen who are really doing all this great work. And I assure you, they have some magnificent before and after photos. Thank you.
All right. What I'm going to be focusing on is challenges that we faced to date on this project. And when I say challenges, these are things that have kept me awake at night. And there's a major player involved in this restoration, and that's Jesus Christ. And there's been a tremendous amount of prayer uplifted to him. And we are always reminded that this is God's house, not our own. And that's why this has really worked, okay? And this is the report that I put together, schematic repair recommendations, and included observation of the sanctuary, the parish house, ministries building, tea garden, chapel, boiler room, and exterior historic fencing, which included the gates. From that, the parish, rightfully so, focused on the sanctuary. It's God's house. That's where the worship is, so that's what they focused on. And this is a parapet, the south parapet. The cemetery had been closed before construction because of potential falling debris on the sidewalks that go around the sanctuary. All of the plaster, all the historic plaster on all these buildings is a direct applied stucco. So it's historic plaster applied directly to brick masonry. But in this case, at some point in the life of the structure, some lath applied stucco was put, and I'll explain why in a minute. But these are the type of things that we've got to focus on fixing for this historic structure. Lath's deteriorated, and it's popping the plaster off. In conjunction with that plaster, right over top of those parapets, you're up in the balcony, we've got water infiltration. And if you talk to the elderly members of the parish, they'll tell you that they've been looking at these stains their whole life, okay? And the other thing I want you to notice, where's Rachel? Rachel's hung up. It's not advancing. Got it? Okay. That's why you got Rachel. One other thing I want to point out, this is the crown molding at the top of the balcony. That's historic plaster, okay? And when we get into farther in these photographs, you're going to see where we're doing water tests, and we actually had to remove the historic plaster because when we're applying water on the roof, we've got to know what's leaking, why is it leaking. So the church entrusted us to remove historic plaster, do our water test, and find out what is actually going on with these leaks. And, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. But one thing I wanted to point out is this is a photograph from somewhere between 1890 and 1910. Same problem, okay? Now, people wonder why engineers and architects don't get along, okay? All right. What's going through the architect's mind? I have all this water coming down off the roof, and what does he do? He sticks a parapet here, and I've got to collect it in an internal gutter and get it off the building, okay? So this is, I mean, it's beautiful, but all this water is coming down and being collected in these drains, and then when it's in these drains, it's being piped out, and then it's going into these collector heads on the outside of the building and coming down the downspout. Now, as an engineer, there's a real easy fix. Take off the parapet and extend the roof over and be done with it. Now, can you imagine me going into the BAR and ask for that? All right. But what we did is we removed historic plaster from inside the building, and we did a series of water tests. And it started very simply. We're spraying water at a drain, and we do this for 15 minutes, and it doesn't leak. Okay, well, let's plug up the drain line and let's flood it. We flood it another 15 minutes. It doesn't leak. About this time, I'm getting a little antsy because I got to answer to Jim Stelling over there. But we start looking around, and I say, okay, there's a lightning rod here, and the solder looks like it's deteriorated. So we spray there. There's our leak. All right, so then we look. Oh, well, there's another solder joint here. Let's try that. Leaks again. All right, well, let's go down. Whoop, here's a lap in the copper coping. Let's spray there. Leaks again. Go down to the next drain. This particular drain here did leak. Okay, so what happened was there was that nice copper roofing, and there were valleys and gutter systems going down to internal drains, and it was draining out. But any water that penetrated that copper, there was actually a roof membrane underneath it, but that roof membrane never made it to, this is the hose that goes through. That hose goes from the drain in the internal gutter out and then out the building. And I'll point out, this right here, that is a hand-carved stone trough, which was the original gutter. Absolutely amazing. I don't know if it was granite or what it was, but it was hand carved stone that was the gutter. But what we ended up doing was, we put a water management system over the parapet. We're doing everything with our coping, our flashing, our waterproofing, but we've got a second system to collect any water that passes that roof membrane and get to a secondary system that'll collect that water and get it out. The other thing is, because we're doing a water management system, we went back with the lath system, but this is stainless steel with stainless steel fasteners. Okay, so you're never going to have to worry about that deteriorating. Now, from a historic standpoint, when we're done, you've got your copper coping, you've got your copper flashing, you've got your historic plaster, you've got your slate roof. I mean, it's what the architect has intended from day one, but we're protecting that historic structure and the historic plaster. In hindsight, we figured it out, but at the time it was very stressful because, it'd been going on for a long time, and we finally figured it out. What we did is, after we finished taking care of the parapets and taking care of the internal drains, the parish wanted to go ahead and take care of the whole east end of the parish. So we sounded the stucco, any stucco that was hollow or delaminated, we removed it and replaced it. And the next challenge was, as we got to these capitals on top of the pilasters, and we sounded them and they were hollow, so we popped off the stucco, and we're looking at a material that we don't even know what it is. And we didn't know if it was repair material or what, but that is actually a really soft limestone that they had used to mold these, or to sculpt these historic capitals. It's absolutely amazing. And what we were able to do is, using some Han repair mortars, recreate those and reestablish them and put back the historic plaster. In 1993, Jim worked for Ruscon, I worked at that time, it was my father's company. I was part owner in it, but engineering, surveying, and planning. And my job was to design the scaffolding system, because at that time in 1993, they completely took all the stucco off of the steeple and replaced it. And my job solely back then was to design the steeple scaffolding. But a design requirement was we designed a freestanding structure. In other words, we were not going to support any scaffolding on the steeple itself. And you'll see these towers. There were 4 towers, and this is up in the front. These are my drawings from 1993, the design of the towers. That's one of them. This at the time, this was a dogwood. I had strict instructions: don't let anything happen to that dogwood. Supposedly, that was the first one to bloom in Charleston every year. And this, I'll tell you, this design was actually in an article in Engineering News Record. What we were able to do, these are the sidewalks that go around the sanctuary, and what we were able to do is pull up the sidewalks, install micropiles, and install those towers, and never touch any of the graves. So it was actually an engineering feat, and it worked really well. This is a plate girder, a beam that spans the back of the church. This is a man. That's a 4-foot deep beam. Brought in the largest crane on the East Coast to set that beam, and that's what supported the scaffolding. All right. That scaffolding in 1993 cost $350,000. By today's standards, it'd probably be $1.25 million. So on this restoration, we're not taking all the stucco off of the steeple. We're going to just fix what we need to, and we don't want to spend $1.25 million now. So is there a different way to do it? And what we did is through prayer. We actually designed a steeple where we have a double cantilevered system through the belfry level, and we designed the scaffolding in 2 phases, to where we've got a double cantilever system at the bottom, a double cantilever at the belfry. We installed a phase 1, which was the upper level of the steeple, and then we did a phase 2, which is the lower level of steeple. And we got, like I said, double cantilevers at the belfry and double cantilevers at the bottom. And I don't know what this cost, but it's a fraction of what it would have cost to do it the other way. And absolutely beautiful when it was done. And it's worked well. I just threw these in here. Ryan and Nathan will talk a little bit more about the gilding of the cross, but I've been doing this for 43 years, and to be able to work on St. Philip's, one of the highlights of my career. I mean, to be able to go up inside the steeple and outside on the scaffolding it's a privilege, and I don't take it for granted. The next challenge is the lantern level, and I'll go through this quickly. But I think something that Jim was faced with is, why are we even doing this? There's nothing wrong with the steeple. I mean, the steeple's beautiful, right? Nothing really going on. But when you get up there and start looking, it's showing its age, and there's issues that have to be replaced. And so the historic stucco is easy. We sound it, we remove it. We've got a mixed design. We're testing the strength of the brick. We're testing the strength of the stucco. We're pigmenting the mortar. We're doing everything we can to do it the way it ought to be done from a preservation standpoint. But what was interesting to me is I'd get up there, and this is brownstone. These are pilasters that go around the lantern level, and I'm looking at this material, and I'm like, this looks like concrete. What in the world is going on? I mean, this looks like concrete. This is brownstone. What is this concrete? So I'm looking at that, and we're trying to figure it out, and it's got all these cracks in it and joints in it. And, we go back and we start looking at the 1886 earthquake. But it was completely replaced in 1886. Now, I had the privilege of working on the Morris Island Lighthouse, and when I worked on the Morris Island Lighthouse, I was reading letters from the lighthouse engineer in 1873, and he's writing Washington, and he's explaining how he's going to drive timber piles, and he's going to put in timber cribbing, and then he's going to pour a new Portland cement concrete. Portland cement was a new concept in the 1870s, in the late 1800s. And it appears that, when they rebuilt the steeple, they used, I'd call it cast stone, but basically a Portland cement type product, and they formed and poured. Another thing that fascinates me, this is 1887. That's when they evidently repaired the steeple. You got to figure that's 20 years after the Civil War. How they got the funds to do this, I mean, that's nothing but an act of faith. You can see the initials of people that worked on it. This is up at the top of the lantern level. This is, probably the mason or the stucco that did it. And, challenges were all these little cracks. We're repairing them with Hahn mortar. These small cracks will turn into bigger issues if we don't take care of them, so we're using different repair methods. And the detailing is absolutely unreal. I mean, just, you're standing up there looking at this, and the detailing that they did, at this lantern level is awesome. And these are just some pictures of what we're repairing up there. Ryan and Nathan will talk more about it, but you can see if we don't, and again, here's some detailing that, all these have been taken down and rehabilitated and put back up. The gates, I've walked past this church my whole life and never thought much of the gates. But when you started looking close, they were in bad shape. This is the stop that's being held together with zip ties. But this is what really caught my eye. That's the top of the gate, and the way it's got it's got an eyelet there with a wrought iron pin that goes in it. But this is what I want you to see. This is the north gate, and they had closed it recently before we repaired it. But I just want you to see what's holding that gate. And that gate, there are two gates. Each gate, just the gate itself weighs 500 pounds. And, I don't do gate design, but we had to figure it out. And what we did, we actually ran numbers, and we had a 500-pound dead load for the gate, and I put another 250 pounds, figuring that all the school kids are going to be riding it back and forth, opening and closing it. And then we calculated the reactions from all that and ran the numbers. And I'll be honest with you, I felt guilty doing all this because I'm like, I'm putting all this time into these gates. But it was the best thing I ever did, because once I handed these documents off to Ryan and Nathan, they had what they needed, and it went real smooth, real quick, fantastic. And we had details on how to do the eyelets, how to tie them into the granite curbs that are there. Fascinating. This is the west gate to the cemetery, and I just want you to see the condition. And these gates weighed 350 pounds apiece. But when you take wrought iron and you bed it into masonry and it starts rusting, when it rusts, it expands. It corrodes, it expands. When it expands, it cracks the masonry, then more water gets in. It's a recurring process. And so the same thing I gave the construction team what they needed to do it. The reason this is detailed so much is because this was really deteriorated, and I thought we might have to completely rebuild this, but the masons were able to repair this using Hahn mortar. Again, what we did this time, this is stainless steel. So we took the masonry down, designed stainless steel eyelets and anchor rods. So we're not going to have that problem again. And I mean, the craftsmanship, absolutely beautiful. What they did is amazing. And then I'll end with this in that, it's just, again, a privilege for me that I'm standing over the altar at the apse, and it's just a privilege to see the detail and to be able to touch it and to see what these guys are doing. You have no idea how big these details are until you get up there. I'm going to close in one more thing, and I think it's real important. This document that I put together for St. Philip's, Jim showed it to you, and I want you to know that I did the exact same thing for a homeowner. I'm going to be doing the same thing tomorrow night for a homeowners association. They're fighting like cats and dogs. I mean, it's really sad, okay? And what I want you to know is that I admire what this parish has done, and that the faith and the trust is unbelievable. Because, number one, the clergy preaches the gospel, so they're letting you know, the way, okay? And then the parish votes for their vestry, and so the parish is trusting the vestry. The vestry assigns a building committee. They're putting the faith in Jim Stelling. Jim Stelling puts the faith in me, and then I put the faith in this construction team. And I will tell you, when I finish my document, I turn it over to this construction team. I don't think about it again, because they are working to the glory of God to put this church back the way it ought to be done. And it is really special to be a part of, and it's fantastic. So thank you.
Being last probably isn't best all times. So I got a lot to follow there with Eddie ahead of you. I'm Ryan McGee with McGee Ratcliffe Construction. I'd like to welcome everybody here as well. Also expressed our gratitude and thanks to St. Philip's team trusting us to work on this beautiful building. It's an honor of a lifetime for myself, for Nathan Youngman, for everybody that works at our company, all of our subcontractors and craftsmen that are working on the building. We take a lot of pride in what we're doing, and we really do appreciate the opportunity to do that. So we're going to kind of walk through just some of the ins and outs of where we're at on the steeple at this point, and kind of show you some of the challenges we were faced with, and then afterwards we'll open it up for some questions. This document you're looking at here, this is just to show you, as we get into some following photos, when Eddie spoke earlier about the double cantilevered steel at the belfry level, this is the document that he worked through to document that. We had to work and do like a LiDAR scan of the steeple. They had to work putting catwalks out, hanging plumb bulbs down. Everything was to the inch of needing to work. The more you went out, the more the weight happened. It affected the steeple, affected his design. So there was a lot of planning that went into making sure this was going to work the way it was intended. We had to pull out the louvers at the belfry level and work to create these support walls that would act as a guide for the steel that was getting installed, as well as, provide a safe atmosphere for the folks to work in. Just some photos of the actual steel getting flown in. So we worked closely with the city of Charleston and the neighbors here to shut down the street for safety while we performed the work. All the work was performed right out in the front on Church Street, and we worked with Bucky Hauling and A.B. Hauling and A&R Sheet Metal. Jason Crosby over there did the fabrication on that. That's some of Bucky's crew right there helping with putting the steel in place. They worked alongside our fellows doing the work up in the steeple to get it in place to allow us to put this, the scaffold that you see. All this supports that scaffolding. Some of these guys have jobs that nobody wants to go do. You see him sliding on a wood platform. He's hooked up to a harness and he's hooked up to a life safety device, but that's how he had to slide out there to make bolt connections. It's just kind of just some more visions of what you see. You don't really kind of take it for granted when you ride by, because it doesn't look like there's much happening there. But that cantilever and the steel that you see hanging down is actually helping support beams. So there's cantilevered steel on the bottom, and it's actually helping support beams that run across the cantilevered steel on the bottom to support the lower scaffold. and all the upper scaffold gets supported by the beams that you see, plus you'll see some tilt posts and some other photos that go back. So it's actually bearing in on itself. We'll go through some of just the scaffold installation photos and then get some of the repairs. We're going to work our way from the top down doing that. So the scaffold team we work with is Custom Quality Scaffolding. They're headquartered out of Savannah, but they have a local office here. Justin Belts and Jaime Montez are the contacts we work with, and then Tom Wolf was their engineer to work closely alongside Eddie and the folks at Stantec to come up with the design that you see. It was a lot of back and forth to get where we are, just because everything was so tight and those projections were so critical, and figuring out how you're going to make this all pass by. The lower section you see, we worked and built a skeleton section to allow us to actually safely pass and build the upper scaffold. So, as Eddie mentioned, we were doing this in phases. So, phase 1 is the upper. You're going to work your way from the top down, but we had to build a skeleton section of phase 2 in order to safely build phase 1. All this is designed just for 16 working people up there. So it's designed for a live load of 16 people that are spaced equally around the scaffold while they're performing work. So at any given time, you're not going to have 15 people all standing in one spot. They're spread around to distribute the load. So that's part of the issue, is that you got to get it to where you're working safely up there and distributing the load properly. That was a photo. The middle photo was something somebody posted on some social media that somebody tracked down, but it was interesting to see the hand line they had working to pass it up. The photo on the end here, this here, I think Nathan had asked them for proof when they got to the top, so they FaceTimed them when they were able to touch the cross. And I tell you, that crew that did the scaffold deserves a lot of kudos. They were proud of what they did, and those guys are a pleasure to work with. And did a fantastic job for us out there. We talked through, so our first task was working from the spire down, essentially. So we focused on the regilding of the cross to start. For that, we hired, it's called John Canning Company, Canning Liturgical Arts. They're out of Connecticut. We did a lot of research to find somebody on the East Coast who was reputable and doing exterior gilding, because it is a different process than interior gilding as well. So they sent a crew out, and these are some before photos when they were getting ready to start prep work. The crew actually, they take the cross down to bare metal. There's a specialty primer they put 2 coats on, and then they re-gild. It's using like just shy of 24 karat gold, I think. It's a 23 gram weight, and it's on sheets. So they go up there and they brush it on. There's an art to it. They have a tacky primer. They let it get tacky to a certain point. They apply it. The day they were doing that, if you happen to be parked on top of the parking garage across the street, you probably have a lot of gold flakes on your car, because they blew all over to that parking garage. We actually had some videos of the process taking place. It was just hard to incorporate it into the presentation. But you could see that if you look on the far right here, you could see the actually gilding taking place. So that's actually attached to like a paper product, and they actually brush that on when they work. The video is working actually. On the spire, you'll see there's a lot of porthole windows up there. So these are some before and after photos of the work that we performed there. All the windows were removed completely and refurbished. The glass that had been replaced with plexiglass was replaced back with real glass. All of them were reglazed. All the joint sealing work was done around them. So you see the before photos and our after photos of the work that was performed up there. Inside the spire, I can't get to that height. I hit the lantern level, and I kind of stopped being able to maneuver around the interior of the wood. Nathan and Jackson and a few other people that work for us are actually able to do so. But it's impressive if you're able to get in there to see how tight the quarters are to get to that point to be able to take those windows out. So we're going to go down now. We're talking about the cornice right at the top of at the bottom of the spire. The wood itself was actually in pretty decent shape. We did some restoration to it, a couple of replacement components to it, but nothing major. And then we worked with Kuzer Painting, who actually did all the prep and paint work on there. You see the cornice itself, this is part of that rebuild that took place following the earthquake. So we found that a lot of the stucco cornice at this level was not sound. It had failed for the substrate attachment. Once we dug into that more, you could actually almost get it with your hand and pull it off without much effort. The substrate at the back of that is actually a concrete beam that runs around. So we worked with Stantec up south masonry. Cody James is back there, who's their foreman, and they came up with a plan that they did to redo the stucco around this cornice. Those are some of the details, kind of before and after. A template was done on every bit of the work that was up there, including all the signature. If anything had to be reworked, all that was taken. A template was made, and you'll see behind me over here some plywood that they used to. These are representations of different levels. So different levels of the different overhangs that you're dealing with, and all the different cornice details. They actually template those ahead of time at all the levels. So everywhere they've worked to do this work that you've seen, they're working through there and creating these to make sure that we're following the pattern when we go back and make the repairs correctly. So there's a slew of these up there. We just took down a few to show you examples. It's kind of hard to see with some of the shadowing. It's difficult to take close pictures sometimes on this scaffold. But if you'd seen some of the details in Eddie's photo too, a lot of the plaster around these keystones and all was failing. So what you see there, this was actually taken back to masonry. Repointing was done around the keystone and around these columns, and that stucco was replaced complete in those areas. The other repairs that he talked about we made to the cast elements, using cathedral stone products to make repairs to those. So it's a repair mortar, and there's some epoxy that you could do to fill the minor cracks. The capitals that you see, the decorative capitals here, I believe, have a lead flashing cap. A lot of the other flashing we found has been copper that have been coated, so that's being clean and coated as well. We're working with Kuzer Painting to do that. This is your lantern level. This is the base. We reworked all the areas around where the handrails were done. All the railings, all those rails have been stripped down and painted and reworked as well. All that flashing has been cleaned up since, and joint sealants have been put in where needed. You'll start to see a lot of the before and after. So if you look at the before pictures and the condition of the stucco and the after, you can see the work that's actually gone in to recreate and make this where we've had to do work to refinish these areas. The Upsouth did use a cathedral stone makes a light duty cleaner, so they did clean and use brushes and stuff. We try to clean as much of the soot and built up debris off the stucco originally as we could. A good bit of it came off. There is some ghosting that took place, but you can see the extensive work that's gone in at the flashing level there. That's a primer coat that you see on there. Originally it was painted a color to match the stucco so it blends in, and that's what it's going back with. But you can see that's all been cleaned up and reworked and primed. And they've cleaned and reworked as they needed to on the stucco levels around that level 5. The level 5 is also where we had run into a few structural cracks, so they actually had to open up and relay a couple, like the outer white or two in one area. We chased any crack we could if anything was substantial. Stantec, Eddie, and Ian had prepared a report and gone through how they wanted cracks reworked with it, and all those details are given us in the documents that they discussed. So level 3 and level 4 are going to be your clocks and then the ornamental ironwork that you see there. So the ornamental ironwork was actually removed. That includes, there's 8 pieces that make up those scrolls that you see. So when you go around that octagon, you have the 4 clocks and then 4 of those. And each 4 of those, actually there's 9 pieces. There are 8 pieces to make the scroll, and then there's a centerpiece that goes and caps it all. And then there's 4 decorative components that go around the outside of the clocks and the ornamental iron components. All those were removed, carefully categorized and engraved on the back, taken to the Cruiser Painting Shop, and prepped, painted, and have since been reinstalled. The clocks, we worked with Stan Christoph at Bell Foundry Christoph. He's handled all the church's clock maintenance and bell maintenance throughout the years. And the original clocks that were in there were a polycarbonate face that you'll see shortly that actually were fastened through the face of the clock. So if you ever had to do work, there was no way to actually get to the clock. So it was redesigned with an aluminum face. It's all attached from inside the steeple. Everything was completely matched to the clocks from the 90s. So all the hands and everything are all gold leaf, and then the black that you see is an aluminum with a body, like an auto body paint on there versus just being a polycarbonate sheet. So if you look to the left, you could see where it was fastened through the face. And then these are the new installed as of last week. The old ironwork versus the painted and restored ironwork going back in. And the stucco repairs around there that you see. As we get level 2, level 1's the area right above the belfry. All this level from the belfry up is where we have a lot of this intricate detail work. So you'll see that there's a lot of cleanup they have to do there. So they're actually working, currently, weather permitting, we'll be running finish on level 1 this week. We're just playing it here with the weather right now. So, but there's a lot of detail work you see with the dental molding and stuff at this level before it steps down and all these overhangs. They've done templates of everything they need to recreate that. These are some photos following some of the interior plaster prep. So the plaster prep, Cruiser Painting's crew went through and did an initial paint prep. So they scraped all loose and failing paint and then followed up with the direction with Cody James from up south, who worked to take a look, and then his crews came in and started chasing cracks in the flat plaster, and then they're actually working in the chancel with molding plaster, making all the repairs on site to any of the decorative ornaments and medallions, and then they'll recast any replacement parts needed on site as well. For the most part, a lot of the decorative plaster is in pretty good shape. It's a lot of little small repairs you have to make just from years of paint being on there. And then also in the interior of the church, just so you're aware, we're working with Morelli Heat and Air. All the air conditioning and heating equipment's getting replaced, so that's an extensive undertaking as well. And everything will be repainted, as they said. I would like to acknowledge some of the subcontractors and vendors that we are working with, because I think they deserve a lot of the kudos as well. I mean, these are all people who trained craftsmen that want to do work like this, and it's a hard thing to find, to keep finding folks that want to learn and take on this type of work. Internally with McGee Ratcliffe Construction, as mentioned, Nathan Youngman's the project superintendent. Nathan and I have worked together a long time. He and I worked together at my father's company, NBM Construction, prior to my starting my own as well. And we would not be able to do this job without him. He's like he said, he's like a family member down here. So. And his right hand out here is Jackson DeJaso, who's sitting in the back there. But he's a big help out here to Nathan working for us. And then another gentleman, Matthew Lingo's out here working with us as well. He happened to have to step away. And then the lead carpenter out here working with him is Mark Sermon, who's been a big help. And I know anything that Nathan tasked him with, he doesn't have to worry about it anymore. So obviously working with Stantec, with Eddie and Ian has been an absolute pleasure. I'd highly recommend their firm for anything you have that comes up or you need a detailed assessment to find this out. Custom Quality Scaffolding, as I mentioned, is helping us with the scaffolding. A.B. Hauling Construction, Bucky Hauling and his crew helped us with the steel erection. They'll help us take it down. Up south is the masons. So they're helping us with the plaster work and the stucco work. Cody James, who's here as well, he's their foreman on site. He's a American College of Building Arts grad, as well as the two people that own the company, Eddie Stroud and Ben Smiley. And they've done a fantastic job of training folks here to perform their work to the standards that they're taught. And Cody's got I don't know how he does what he does with the amount of folks he has out here working, but he deserves a big hand because he does a lot. Glasgow Roofing's helped us with some of the copper repairs that we needed, and they actually helped do install the copper back in the 90s, I believe, when y'all did it. Wasn't Sid the roofer back then as well? Yeah. So it's funny, full circle, you know, Eddie, you see Eddie worked on the scaffold design, he's back involved, we had the roofer back involved. There's several people that are working on teams with us who've worked on this project 30 years ago as well. So Seal Titus, South Carolina is the joint sealant contractor we're working with. I mentioned Kuzer Painting, Morelli Heating and Air is handling the air conditioning, and MJK Electric's helping us with the electrical access. And I'd mentioned Bell Foundry Christoph helping with the clocks. But we'll you can see repairs underway, and that's going to be a task in and of itself. But we're working both in and out and underneath the church and everywhere you can imagine at this point. So I think we'll open up the questions if anybody has any.
Does anyone have a question? I'll come to you with a microphone.
What will the finish coat of the ceiling be?
The finish coat. I'm sorry. The finish coat of what?
Of the ceiling?
The ceiling inside the church.
Yes.
It's a painted finish to match the existing. So they go back and make repairs to the plaster, and then we'll have a painted finish to match the existing color.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
A few of your biggest surprises so far?
You know, I think the planning to get the access in place was our biggest challenge. Nathan, I don't know if I'm misspeaking. I don't know if there's been any huge surprise. I think maybe the cornice level, the stucco at the cornice level right below the spire, kind of, yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, while we dug into a lot of the water intrusion stuff we worked on earlier, it was interesting to find, you know, the original stone carved gutter intact and underneath. And what you find even in the crawl space when they've been in there cleaning out to get better access now is that there's where the old organ balcony used to wrap around. The foundations for that still, the brick piers are still down there from where the columns used to bear. While they were cleaning out the crawl space, they found, I don't know, a bag full of plaster medallions that were buried, one complete intact flower that was buried 6 inches below the dirt. So we're salvaging everything we can from all that for reuse or to turn over to the church for just their historic references to be able to put out on display.
Did you find any ordnance from Civil War bombardment?
Not to my knowledge, not yet. I also can't fit in the crawl space. So. I have to lay down and put my head down and look down there and then trust the photos that I'm seeing. Yes, sir. Is there any work being done to the foundation? And what kind of foundation is underneath, particularly the steeple? So, I'll let Eddie correct me if I'm wrong, but we're working in the crawl space right now. What we've done is we've created access points. We're repointing everywhere that's accessible in the crawl space right now. So all the masonry walls that we can get to are repointing currently, including all the piers that support the interior columns. That typically this age you'd see the masonry walls just get thicker as they go down, and it's all just either bearing onto earth or there's a palmetto log pad or some sort of log pad underneath that. But if he wants to.
Now, I've been fascinating with the settlement of that steeple for a long time. My parents were married in St. Philip's, and my sister was married in St. Philip's as well, and I can remember getting ready for my sister's wedding, and the stairs to the balcony, if you stand on the landing and look at the glass that to the nave, you'll see where the glass, the frames have shifted with the settlement of Steeple. Also get on the balcony and look at that last bay that ties into the steeple, and you'll see how much the steeple's settled. The steeple has settled significantly, and also flowing glass. Supposedly, I think I learned in physics that glass is actually a liquid. If you look at the glass panes inside the sanctuary there, near where the steeple is, you'll actually see flow in the glass. Absolutely fascinating. So I had to say that.
All right, we've got one question here, and then we'll take our last one right over there.
Y'all are doing a fantastic job. You talked about how many people are back for basically round 2 of this restoration. What is the realistic goal for this second round to last until you may have to do one in the future? What as many years that this is expected to really last?
I mean, a lot of that depends on weather events that we have, I mean, ultimately anything you do like this, you're trying to get, when I say a generational fix, you're thinking 30 to 50 years is the ultimate goal on that. And I think that's what we're trying. I'm hoping that a lot of what we're doing now will last longer. There's some advancement in some of the products we're using for some of the restoration of the decorative components, and the coatings that we're putting on some of the metal components will last longer for sure, because we're using a epoxy type paint that's used on ships versus just an enamel coating. So, the hopes that you'll get more time out of it with that approach.
What is the engineering solution that came up with for the balcony stairs that are cantilevered, and I know that's always a concern for the congregation.
That's in the manual there, and I said, no, what it is, of course, got the same problem at directory too, but anyhow, there's some posts, if you notice, there's some posts have been added, okay? And the reason is, in order to make those balconies work properly, what we will actually do, you'll take the plaster down, I will design a steel member that will be the configuration of the stairs that will span from the little stud wall underneath the landing all the way up to the balcony wall, okay? But that's the only way you're going to make it work. If you have a mortised and tendered wood joint, it's not going to work. But what we do, we can take the plaster off. I'll probably use a 3 or a 4-inch steel channel, and then it will be welded together, full strength connection, and then that can be bolted into those stringers so that visually you won't know it's there, but it'll work. And the struggle you get into, and Nathan and I were talking, do you try to level those landings out or let them stay the way they are? Well, the fact that the steeple has settled as much as it is, we will fix it structurally so it won't go any further, but you will still see that. And I insisted that we put in those posts because it's, if you really loaded the stairs the way they should be loaded, I don't think they could take the load.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I just want to say to the project team, this is an absolutely stunning act of stewardship that you all have done for the city, for the site. And I just want to ask you all to join in thanking our panel members for coming out tonight. All right. Get home safe, everyone. Thank you.